I'm an occupational therapist and a certified driver rehab specialist. I'm an instructional assistant professor in the UFOT department, and I'm the manager of the Smart Driver Rehab Program. We are not part of the Fixel Institute, but we're literally about a half a mile up the street. So we're close neighbors. So listed here, and I apologize that this slide got busy as I kept adding things to it. But these are all symptoms that have been discussed in the previous presentations. So what I'm going to do, the unfamiliar thing you're probably seeing at the top, potential barriers to participation, SIPDE. So that's the thing that's going to probably make sense to nobody. But that's how we all actually approach driving. So S is searching the environment. I is identifying important information. P is predicting the actions of other road users. D is deciding what you're going to do, and E is executing it. So what I want you to think about, rather than me talk about all these different symptoms, which have already been covered, what I want to do is talk about things in relation to driving. So as far as searching in the environment, one of the things that Dr. McFarland mentioned was problems with saccades, which is jumping your eyes between targets. If you think about it when you drive, you look straight ahead at the car in front of you and at the roadway in front of you, but you also have to move your eyes to your mirrors. You have to move your eyes maybe to a traffic sign or to a traffic light or to notice the pedestrian over on the sidewalk. So you're jumping your eyes around, and if you're not able to do that efficiently, that's going to slow down the process. And one of the big things in driving is how quickly things happen. So we want to be able to find that information quickly. If you have spatial difficulties, you may have a hard time judging where things are in relationship to you. So that could affect your ability to tell where your car is within the lane or where something else is relative to you. So maybe parking is a problem. Now, as we get into the identify, well, that's where we have to decide if something matters, right? We have to pick out the most important information. Studies have shown that with HD, we can have problems with selective attention. That's picking out something from a busy environment, let's say. So when you're driving, picking out an important sign, picking out that the car next to you has put their turn signal on and they're going to make a lane change in front of you. So being able to pick out some very specific information from that busy visual environment in front of you. Being able to remember, let's say, also memory being an issue, that there was a blue truck behind you and you're about to make a lane change and that blue truck isn't there. Oh, I better look and see where he's gone. Is he coming up alongside me, for example? So having to remember things, even just remember where you're going. So we have to find things in our environment, identify what they are. That's a pedestrian, that's a cyclist, and then we predict what's going to happen. So constantly as we drive, and given the age of the typical person with HD, you're going to be an experienced driver, right? You know how to drive. You haven't forgotten how to drive. Driving is something you've been doing. It's very, very automatic. But as we go along, we are constantly predicting what other people around us are going to do. Is that pedestrian going to walk across the street, or are they going to wait for me to go by? Is that car in front of me going to cut me off? Is that person going to stop at that stop sign? Do they know it's my turn? So we have to make accurate predictions. If we're having difficulties, say with impulse control, or difficulty anticipating hazards, which is another problem that's been shown, then we may make inaccurate predictions. Then there's the decision making. One of the other issues within HD is the processing speed deficits. So are we having more difficulty in the speed at which we're able to process all this information, both taking in the visual information, running it through the filters in our mind, and then coming to a decision? So if we're processing more slowly, even though the decision we make in the long run may be correct, it may take us too long to make that decision, and now we've run out of time to act upon it. We may be slower to notice the hazards. So that also will affect the decision-making process. And then there's the impulsivity that was talked about. The last presenter talked about reckless driving. Is the person taking chances that are ill-advised? So again, in deciding what to do, part of what you're doing is weighing the risk. Do I think I can get through this intersection before that other car gets there? What are the chances of something happening? So, and if you don't have insight into your own behaviors, that may be affected. So we're looking at making a decision. Once you made a decision, the final thing you have to do is execute it. So in executing it, that's where we get more into the physical manifestations. So if you're having difficulty with coordination, one of the more recent clients I've seen with HD had a lot of physical symptoms, a lot of the chorea. And so some of the things that I was seeing were steering movements that were very jerky. So trying, number one, difficulty staying in the lane because she couldn't tell exactly where her car was within the lane, but also when making corrections, very jerky movements of the wheel due to the coordination issues. And then as far as speed control, with her right foot pressing on the gas, we would speed up and slow down and speed up and slow down, which makes for a very uncomfortable ride for your pedestrian, your passenger, but also is indicative of just that inability to control the movement. And what was more concerning to me was once she'd hit the brake and maybe we're stopping behind somebody or stopping in an intersection waiting for our turn, her foot would keep lifting pressure off the brake because, again, involuntary movements. And so the car would creep forward and creep forward and creep forward. And so now we're creeping into the intersection or we're closing the gap between us and the vehicle in front of us. So those involuntary movements, obviously it wasn't her fault, she couldn't control it, but that made it more difficult. Now I added the gait and balance to this list because part of being safe in community mobility, which may mean independent driving, it could mean using public transportation, you're having to walk, right? You might have to walk to the car, to and from the car. And so the possibility of having a fall when you're doing that is also an issue. So all of these different symptoms can affect a person's ability to drive. These are some warning signs. So, whether you're trying to notice these things in yourself or whether you're a family member or a caregiver that's riding with the person with HD, these are some of the things you want to look at. Now, the three that I put in bold are some of the easier ones to notice. Some of the others are a little bit harder to necessarily pick up on. But a person may start they may start using the second one, 2 feet driving. If the person from a coordination standpoint is having difficulty moving their foot from gas to brake, they may start using both feet, 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake. That can be a reasonable strategy. But on the other hand, if they're slow in releasing each pedal, if they don't time it correctly, then they may be riding their brake while they're going forward, which can heat up the brakes and cause you to have brake failure. Or in newer cars, sometimes the car will actually cut out because the car's computer is confused because it's getting both impulses. Also, you could be giving it gas while you're stopped, and then when you release the brake to go, jump forward and sort of have jackrabbit starts because you were already giving it some gas, so you'd already revved the engine higher. The pumping gas and brakes I was mentioning, so rather than smoothly being able to depress them and have a smooth start or a smooth stop, you're having this pumping action because of the uncontrolled movements, the abrupt steering, difficulty staying in the lane, poor concentration. So being able to keep focus on the driving task, being slow to identify the hazards, maybe becoming easily frustrated, maybe a little bit more road rage. One thing we really worry about, particularly as we start moving from maybe MCI, from the mild cognitive impairment more into dementias, is getting lost in familiar areas. So obviously we can all get turned around when we don't know where we are, but that shouldn't really happen in a familiar area. So that's a big red flag. And then poor estimation of space. Again, that difficulty judging quite where the car is. So if you're starting to see these things, these are all signs, not necessarily that you have to start driving, but certainly that you should have a driving evaluation, just like you would have any other kind of therapy evaluation. So what makes up a driving evaluation? We call it a comprehensive driving evaluation. The first thing that we do is get your personal history, your medical history, your driving history. So we want to know, how long have you been diagnosed? What are your symptoms like? And then what's your driving history? Are you somebody that drives regularly? Have you already made some changes to your driving? Have you already self-limited? You're only driving in familiar areas. You don't get on the interstate. You don't drive at night. Are there already things that you're doing? And then the assessments that we do, much like the assessments that were just mentioned, we're going to look at your motor abilities, at your coordination, your strength. We're going to look at whether there's any sensory changes. We're going to look at your cognitive abilities. Again, many of the same tests that have already been mentioned, we're going to repeat those. We're going to look at your vision, just because vision is so important. We want to make sure that we know how your eyes are working, so those saccadic movements, but also how clearly you're seeing, just in case that's an issue, and your visual perceptual skills. So we look at all of these things first in the office, and then we move on to an on-road assessment. We use our vehicle, just like a driver's ed situation. We have a brake on our side. We have a newer vehicle, so we have all the advanced systems like the lane maintenance and so forth. Many of these systems may be things that are helpful when someone's early on in their symptoms with helping them compensate. So sometimes, when we drive with you, after we've looked at what are your particular deficits, and then what do we see in your actual driving, we're able to make our recommendations. Now, our recommendations can range from, at this point, you're doing fine, to, what we would suggest making some changes to your driving. Those changes might be putting some limitations on, like maybe you're only driving in familiar areas, maybe you're avoiding heavier traffic. It depends on what's appropriate to you. Maybe you're considering replacing a vehicle, and maybe some of these more advanced systems would be helpful. We could have some strategies to offer you to work on your driving. Or in some cases, we do have to recommend that a person stop driving. Ideally, we see you early in your disease process so that we know how you're doing, and we can kind of give you a good handle on whether things are safe now, and then periodically see you again as your symptoms change to help you and your family determine at what point is driving no longer advisable. So in terms of getting seen, if you are either local to the Gainesville area, and much like Fixel is the only place in North Central Florida, we're the only driving program in North Central Florida. So if you're kind of north of Orlando or Tallahassee and east or west of Jacksonville, we're sort of it. So I've got our phone number up there, also our email address. You can ask your physician, whether it's a Fixel physician or another physician, to fax us a referral. We do need a referral because we want to be able to converse with your doctor and provide the results, also get some office notes so that we know what's going on with you. Now, if you're outside of our area, if Gainesville isn't where you'd be coming, or even you're in another part of the country, that address down there, the www.aded.net, that's a national organization of driving specialists, and you can go to that website and look for a provider closer to your area. So if you're not in this part of Florida, certainly, being able to find somebody closer to you would be important. A lot of times, even clients that are from further away, if they are seeing the physicians at Fixel, very often will coordinate having a driving evaluation with, say, one of your checkups. So if you let us know, here's the day we're coming, we can see if we can fit you in either prior to your doctor's appointment or after. So we do work a lot with the doctors at Fixel, because our ultimate goal is to keep you driving as long as you can safely do so. We don't want you to stop driving earlier than you need to, because not being able to drive does lead to a lot of the problems that we're talked about. You know, when we talk about depression and social isolation, sorry. All of those things are exacerbated by not being able to get out and about in your community and participate in things. So driving is an important means to an end. Even getting to your doctor's appointments or picking up your medications, you know, all of those things make a difference if you're able to independently go and do them. So as I say, you know, we want to keep you driving as long as we can safely do so. But it's also important for not only your safety, but the safety of others, that we also have a good handle on at what point have we crossed that line between this is still fine and maybe it's not a good idea. And because of the lack of insight, very often the person with HD is not going to be the best judge of when is it time. Thanks very much for the time.